And joining us on the phone line, Janine Ogle from My Vote Counts as the National Coordinator. Ahmed Sheikh Imam is the National Freedom Party Member of Parliament, also on the phone line. Good evening to both of you, and thanks so much for joining us. Of course, you've indicated as My Vote Counts, Janine, but just looking at the voting process where the DA is arguing that there won't be any overt interference in that process. Why is this particular ruling important for you?
So, it's important because what the court has ordered is that the private funding of political parties and independent vote candidates is reasonably required for the effective exercise of the right to vote. I think we've argued this several times at MVC that, this information that we want on political party funding is not just, yes, it's about transparency, but it's beyond that. And it's linked to the right to vote and what we believe is the right to make an informed vote. And for that reason, we feel this order is very important.
So you're saying, for example, if it were discovered that a particular donor had unscrupulous dealings, perhaps even by association, that could change the perception of a voter in terms of who they choose?
Yes, so it's about corruption, it's about undue influence and people's perceptions of political parties, but it's also about political party policies. So, for instance, if a political party argues very strongly or has a policy on, green energy, and maybe the political party then accepts money from a fossil fuel company. If the voter or the public knows that this political party is actually accepting funding from a fossil fuel company, we then know that post-elections, should they be voted into power, those policies that they have, their stance around green energy may change. So, yes, it's about corruption, but it's also about people being able to see where on the political spectrum political parties actually fall.
All right, Janine, please stay on the line with us. We also have on the phone line from the National Freedom Party, Ahmed Sheikh Imam. Thank you so much for your time and good evening to you. Is there a real threat to the voter discretion being compromised, especially if they want to remain anonymous?
Well, I must be honest, I must agree with my colleague, and let me congratulate her once again on behalf of the NFP. My Vote Counts, I think they have made the right decision. They have gone to court, and I think they have succeeded in the interest of the majority of the South Africans, the electorate, which I think is very, very important. But let me start off by also saying, there are many aspects to the issue of political party funding, the influence that it has. Let us not forget that political parties is not a private business that belongs to some individuals for their own gain. Political parties depend on the electorate for their success. So, accounting to the electorate, there should be no compromise in terms of that. What we have found in politics in the country thus far, yes, when business, especially business, has to fund political parties, they do it with an intention of gain, that they want something in return. Now, there's two aspects there. One is either to get gain in terms of business from the ruling parties or those parties that are governing at any level in the country, be it local level, provincial level, or national level. So that is how, first of all, that they do. The second aspect is where there is interference in the country itself by those that are able to get funding from specifically outside sources to destabilize and overthrow countries, not governments, not only in South Africa, you find this throughout the world. So any restriction and ensuring that we are now accountable, we are transparent, will go a long way in ensuring that elections are free, it's fair, that the people at the end of the day are the ones that benefit. That is actually the first. I want to give you an example. And I hope that at My Vote Counts go one step further than what they are going right now, and their success will now encourage them to do this. If you even take local government for that matter, take municipalities, political parties control what happens there. In terms of who they employ, that should not be the case. In terms of, and the reason why they put in people that they want there, because of of corruption, they tend to give tenders to people that they want to, so they get the funding, and political parties then are able to enrich themselves. Again, that's the next step that we need to go to try and have transparency and take that away too from political party and let it be an administrative matter. So no one political party that is governing at any level will be able to go there and exploit the situation. That's the other thing that is quite off that has happened. The third thing is this: if you talk about party funding from government, from the state, and an ideal example is what we receive. Every member of parliament is allocated an amount of approximately 47,000 rand per month in this country just to have constituency officers. What is the purpose of a constituency? It's not a political matter. It's a matter you are a go-between parliament and the people, despite irrespective of which party you come from. Do we ever check and account for whether these officers exist, whether the staff exists, whether the furniture exists, how many meetings, are they really performing duties? Again, that funding too that is given to political parties are being abused and exploited. So again, political party funding, I believe, the NFP believes we must be accountable to the electorate on any kind of funding we get, be it from the state, be it from private funding. We must account to the people, and not only account. If you look at even political parties, we need to also be transparent about where we get all our money, not only about and how we run
Mr.
our
Imam,
affairs.
just stay on the line, please. We have Vincent Smith, the chairperson for the Parliament Ad Hoc Committee on Political Party Funding. And thank you so much. Good evening to you, Mr. Smith. Thank you for joining us. So how do we mitigate the undue influence that private donors could have on the policy shift or even benefiting from government lucrative tenders? We've seen a coordinated syndicate, if you want to call it that, particularly in SOEs where there are evergreen contracts that are automatically renewed without any due process. All right, Mr. Smith, we'll try and get hold of him. Janine, maybe you can pick up on that one, in terms of capacity, whether in Parliament or even in municipal level, whether we have not only the expertise, the mechanisms, and also the oversight to deal with issues of undue influence from private donors.
So, I mean, different aspects of it. So some people have concerns around the fact that people who fund political parties are then post-elections, when political parties get into power, are then able to get tenders from government, because, and influence those processes post-elections because they funded the political party prior. So, we have legislation procurement legislation that addresses those kinds of things, but that's not the only influence that we're talking about. There's also a possibility for influence in terms of policy. So sometimes a person may donate to a political party because they have very strong views or they'd like to push a particular policy. People know that this person feels very strongly about a certain policy. But then we don't know that they're influencing the political party through funding the political party, because we don't know who's funding political parties at all. So there's a corruption angle, but there's also this possibility that our political parties are being influenced in terms of the policies that they hold and the policies that they campaign on by donors.
But I want to look at it in terms of the recipient, in this case, of those favors. And Mr. Imam, maybe if you can give us a sense of the clandestine way on how these negotiations would happen, and also donors wanting to remain anonymous. Is it not their right to do so? So how do you uncover or pierce that veil of secrecy in this particular regard?
The DA in our court case it did argue that for them they feel that the donor's right to privacy is important. We argue that the right to access to information and the principles of transparency in terms of our democracy are actually paramount, and that they trump the rights of a group of individuals or some individuals to remain anonymous, and that right to privacy, but specifically around this issue. We've heard that argument before, but our argument is that it's not enough. Access to this information is important to strengthen our democracy, to improve trust in our electoral system, and therefore we must have this information.
Janine, please stay on the line. We have Vincent Smith on the line. He's the chairperson for the Parliament Ad Hoc Committee on Political Party Funding. Mr. Smith, I hope you can hear us better now. Good evening to you. Is this potentially a Pandora's box that could implode or even unveil more sinister intentions in terms of what some donors may come up to?
No, I don't think so. Good evening to you. I think the intention is to make political parties more accountable. The intention is to ensure that the voice of South Africans, ordinary South Africans, is what is more important in terms of policy direction that political parties adopt. And if there are indeed donors who have been donating for nefarious reasons, then they must come to the fore and they must be held accountable, and political parties who receive donations from nefarious individuals, they too must be held accountable. So I think that this is a step in the right direction in terms of enhancing democracy in South Africa.
But Mr. Smith, how then would you solicit those kind of information, especially in view of these maybe being individuals or executives and not necessarily representing a publicly listed company? There are all manner of ways of concealing information.
Well, you are correct. There are all manner of ways. We're hoping that conscience of right-thinking South Africans will not make them do what is not.
All right, we've lost Vincent Smith. Unfortunately, his line wasn't very clear. We have Kilani. Good evening to you, and thanks for joining us. Hi, Kilani. Phone lines acting up all over the place. Oliver Dixon, social political analyst. Hopefully, you are with us. Your view just in this landmark ruling from the Western Cape High Court that political parties now have 18 months, in essence, to amend the legislation so that there's greater transparency in terms of their friends with deep pockets.
Look, I have to side with the DA quite strongly on this one. When party funding is being released, the parties who will be harmed the most are small political parties, the opposition parties in particular, because oftentimes, organizations and companies and corporations would be wary about being seen by the ruling party to be aligned with political parties by donating money to them and funding them for campaigning and initiatives and pursuing court cases and that sort of thing. And I think that really harms our democracy in this instance. I think a lot of the times I think it would harm the ANC too.
Oliver?
Certainly has donors who do not want to be seen, or donors who want to remain anonymous. And I think it's important to protect that secrecy.
All right, let's get Mr. Imam line. Are you of the view that there could be potential danger not only to the ruling party but primarily to smaller parties, where there had been a call of perhaps putting funding in one kitty and distributing it equitably? What's your view?
Well, right now, let me add, smaller parties are being marginalized at the moment, even if you look at the funding that they get from government, and they get very little funding or no funding from outside sources. The question is why? Because business, whoever wants to donate, they want something in return, and so they will give it to those that are in governing, be it in local, provincial, or national level. So the bigger parties will always be getting more and more, and their kitty will be becoming bigger all the time. And I must also agree with your colleague when she spoke there about policies. Policies are very, very important. Let me give you an ideal example. This country, including the Minister of Health, had condemned the poultry that was coming from the United States. We were going to reject it wholeheartedly. What happened? There were political parties, because they are being funded by certain countries. What do? They vigorously opposed it. If you look at peace in the Middle East, exactly the same thing. Parties that are being funded, you cannot expect them to go and support any initiative by government to want to support the people of Palestine. And what is happening? Why? Because these people are being funded. So your policies are also dictated by your funders. I agree wholeheartedly. That's the problem. The other issue is this. If you take the smaller political parties right now, with what we get in comparison to what the others get, and I want to give you one good example. I was speaking about constituency offices and things. We as the National Freedom Party have constituency offices in most parts of the country. Check how many other political parties have got these things, and yet these are supposed to be independent offices, yet they are getting paid for it. So can you see the advantage that the bigger parties are having continuously. And yet, we equally serve all the people in this country, irrespective of which party they come from. So we believe that maybe to a certain extent we will be disadvantaged, but I think we will gain more if it goes into a central fund and that money is then distributed to the different political parties.
All right, please stay on the line, Mr. Imam. We have Philani from Alexander. Thanks for calling. Good evening to you. What's your comment or question?
Actually, it's a comment from my side. I think the court ruling, it's a win for South Africans, taking into consideration that there are some funders for political parties who are funding for some negative influence to those political parties. Some political parties are being held ransom because of those funds which they receive from particular individuals or particular companies.
Okay, but how then does that, Philani, maybe you can listen on the radio, so to speak, and I'll ask this to Mr. Smith as well, especially when it comes to a particular directive or imperative that the country has taken, according to the ruling party, that being radical economic transformation. There had been concerns around policy uncertainty as to what shape this will take and what impact it will have on those with vested interests. Could that be an example of how private donors could hinder a particular narrative or direction that a country is taking?
You're talking to me?
Yes, Mr. Smith.
Yeah. No, look, first of all, I can't see any reason why any South African who believes that there must be multi-party democracy according to the Constitution, who believes that he's doing something for a correct cause, will want to remain private if everything that he's doing is above board. Secondly, if indeed you feel strongly that you want to keep your privacy, we have made provision for a central fund where you'd be able to donate not directly to a political party of your choice, but to the democratic process, and that money will be distributed to all political parties. The third thing I want to say is I disagree with your analyst, Mr. Dixon, that it would disadvantage political parties. Our constitution has been made up on transparency and openness, and the courts have reaffirmed that today. So I don't understand when he says that political parties and the ANC will be disadvantaged. I am saying to you today that the ANC is prepared to open its books to all South Africans in terms of where it gets its money from, so that we too must be measured by what we feel other political parties must be measured by.
Yeah, but what are the ramifications or the disadvantages of disclosing political parties? As we heard from My Vote Counts, that this could shift the view of potential voters for a particular party.
Look, there are no ramifications as far as I'm concerned. If you want to vote directly for a political party, like most political parties in Parliament, we're saying that that should happen. If you want to vote for the democratic process and everybody must participate, as I indicated, there is a fund. The third thing that I want to dispel is this notion that donors would not want to donate because they would be bullied by governing parties. Now we have governing parties in the Western Cape, DA, nationally ANC, and in various municipalities by other political parties. There is law that says that if you feel that you were unfairly not given a tender because you are not the favorite or you're not supporting a political party that is in government, you are able to appeal that tender process and you will be given a hearing. So there is no fear that you will not be given tenders because you don't support the ruling party, wherever that ruling party might be. You would be able to go and appeal, and that appeal will be heard if you've got grounds for that appeal.
And Mr. Smith, just before we let you go, in your view, whether we need to adopt a similar approach to unscrupulous donors by imposing sanctions as the outcome of the democratic process in the advent of democracy?
I think the starting point is to hold political parties accountable, because it will be near impossible to be able to police individual South Africans. But political parties that are represented at the legislature and at national surely we'll be able to hold them accountable. And if they aren't able to explain where or why they've got the money, then they should be the ones that should face the sanction. And the message will clearly go to all South Africans very quickly that you cannot donate for reasons other than supporting that party genuinely or because you support the multi-party democracy system in South Africa.
All right, Mr. Vincent Smith, the chairperson for the Parliament Ad Hoc Committee on Political Party Funding. A quick response, Oliver Dixon. Mr. Smith disagreeing that this would be a disadvantage to political parties. As a matter of fact, it's something to be lauded because it will give us an opportunity to scrutinize and hold parties accountable.
I don't say this often, but Mr. Vincent is incredibly naive in how he views this, particularly because his approach is very theoretical. In theory, all those things would be nice and they would work. Parties would all take money from the same kitty because all the guys who donated money would donated it to a central fund and it would be distributed equally. Unfortunately, that's not how party funding works in the real world. How people and organizations disperse funding is according to issues, principles, and campaigns. If I support a certain initiative or a certain policy or a certain, if I advocate for something very particular, I will then steer my funding in the direction of the party that does that. And I specifically want to do that because I want to advance that particular issue. That's how democracy works, and that's the nice thing about democracy. So say, for instance, there's an organization out there that wants to support the land reclamation project and wants to fund specifically the economic freedom fighters. They would not do so if they have to, expose to the whole country.
But then we're talking about undue influence because that very donor would want to have a return on investment based on that particular project. But I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there and pick it up on social media. We had Oliver Dixon, social political analyst via Skype, and Janine Ogle is the national coordinator for My Vote Counts, emerging victorious at the Western Cape North High Court today, with the court now proclaiming that political parties need to disclose where their money comes from. We also have Ahmed Sheikh Imam from the National Freedom Party, a member of parliament, joining us on the phone line. We'll take a quick ad break. Do stay with ANN7 Prime.